Picture this situation. It's 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. You're standing in the middle of a pharmacy aisle.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right. You know the exact vibe.
Yeah.
The fluorescent lights are humming overhead, creating that weird sort of sterile atmosphere.
And it smells like, I don't know, a mix of rubbing alcohol and cheap candy.
Exactly. Rubbing alcohol and cheap candy.
Yeah.
And you're just staring at a shelf that is absolutely packed with vitamins. It is a literal sea of plastic bottles.
Yellow labels, green labels, white labels.
Gold caps, silver caps. And you're just trying to do something good for your body, right?
Yeah.
So you reach out and you pick up 2 bottles.
Let me guess. They look almost completely identical.
Almost identical. Same brand, same size, same big promise of, vitality or whatever on the front.
Yeah.
But one label says folate, and the other label says folic acid.
Ah, yes. It's the paradox of choice in its absolute purest form. And it's incredibly confusing.
It is incredibly confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So you pause. You look back and forth between the bottles, and you probably think, well, this just have to be synonyms, right? It's just marketing. It's 2 different words for the exact same nutrient.
Which is such a logical conclusion to jump to.
Totally. So naturally, you flip them over to check the price. One is, let's say, $5 cheaper. You toss that one in your basket. You maybe grab a toothbrush on your way out, and you move on with your life.
Yeah.
It's a scene that happens literally thousands of times a day all over the world.
It does. And honestly, I don't blame anyone for thinking that way. It's the most reasonable assumption you could possibly make in that moment. Why would a normal person assume those 2 words mean 2 completely different things?
Right. They sound the same.
They do.
Huh?
But that specific moment, that split-second decision to grab the cheaper bottle because, vitamin B9 is vitamin B9, that is the perfect example of how a tiny, seemingly insignificant linguistic difference on a label can mask a massive biological reality.
Massive reality.
Yeah. Because while those 2 words might sit right next to each other in the dictionary, and while they're often used interchangeably even by really busy doctors and nurses inside your body, they are worlds apart.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we are digging into today. I'm Parker, and if you know me, you know I am absolutely obsessed with these little moments, these pharmacy aisle moments, where we think we know something, but the reality is way more complex and way more interesting. I love unpacking the why behind the everyday health advice we get.
And I'm Blake. My focus is always on the mechanism. I want to know the biochemistry that dictates why one molecule heals you and another might just clog up your system. I like looking at the big picture implications, and today this isn't just about semantics.
No, definitely not.
We aren't just here to be grammar police about vitamin labels. This is about biochemistry. It's about your energy. It's about your mood. It's about long-term cellular health.
And it's also about a genetic factor that affects a huge chunk of our listeners, right?
Absolutely. We are going to talk about a genetic quirk, the MTHFR gene, that affects nearly 40% of the population. And it fundamentally changes how they process this specific vitamin.
Which, by the way, sounds like a swear word when you read it on paper, but we'll definitely get to that.
It really does, but I promise it's just an enzyme.
So we have a very clear mission for this deep dive. We are going to explain the identity crisis of vitamin B9. We're going to explore this genetic factor that nearly half of us have walking around. And ultimately, we want to provide actionable clarity.
Yes.
We want you to walk away from this deep dive knowing exactly what to put in your body for better energy and long-term health. So let's unpack this. We have this umbrella term, vitamin B9. Start us off with the basics here. What is B9 actually doing in the system?
So vitamin B9 is an essential nutrient. And when we use the word essential in nutrition, we don't just mean it's good for you in the way that like eating blueberries is good for you.
Right, it's a technical term.
Exactly. It's a technical term. We mean your body strictly cannot make it on its own. It doesn't have the internal machinery. You have to get it from outside sources, either from food or from supplements. And the other big thing to know is that it is water soluble, which is a key characteristic to understand.
Water soluble. Okay, so that means we don't store it, right? Unlike, say, vitamin D or vitamin A, which gets tucked away in your fat cells.
That's right. Fat-soluble vitamins can be stored in your body's tissues for a rainy day. Your liver can hold on to them, but water-soluble vitamins are very much a use-it-or-lose-it situation.
You just pee out whatever you don't use right then.
You pee out the excess, so that means you need a frequent, consistent replenishment. You can't just, load up on a massive spinach salad at Sunday brunch and hope to be covered for the rest of the month.
Okay, so it's a daily, ongoing requirement. And what is the actual job description of B9? Like, if I hired B9 to work in my body, what is it doing from 9 to 5?
Oh, it has a very high-pressure job. It is essentially the architect of your biology. It is absolutely critical for DNA synthesis. It helps produce red blood cells. It manages cell division.
That's building things.
It's the ultimate builder. Without adequate B9, your body literally cannot build new cells properly. If you just take a second and think about how many cells you turn over in a single day, your skin cells, your blood cells, your entire gut lining.
Which turns over every few days, right?
Exactly. When you realize the sheer volume of cell turnover, you realize how insanely busy B9 is. It is the project manager for all new growth in the body.
So pretty important stuff. We need it to keep the building standing. Now here's where the split happens. We have what the source material calls the tale of two B9s.
Right.
On one side, we have folate. On the other side, we have folic acid. Let's start with the original, the OG, the natural one, folate.
Right. So the word folate actually gives you a massive hint about its origin. It comes from the Latin word folium, which means leaf.
Folium.
Yes. And that is your biggest clue as to where you find it in nature. It is the naturally occurring form of B9 found in whole foods.
So when I hear the word folate, I should basically just picture foliage.
Exactly. Think foliage, think dark green, leafy vegetables. Spinach, kale, collards, romaine lettuce. That is the natural home of folate.
Yeah.
Now, biologically speaking, natural folate is what we call a polyglutamate form.
Polyglutamate. Okay.
I know that sounds super technical, but here is what actually matters for you to know. It enters the body in a reduced state. In chemistry terms, being reduced means it holds its electrons in a specific way that makes it chemically ready, or at least very nearly ready for the body to use right out of the gate.
Got it. So it shows up to work, ready to go. It's already wearing its uniform. It's punched the clock.
Pretty much. It's ready to hit the factory floor. But, and this is a really big but, it is incredibly fragile.
Fragile.
Well, folate is a bit of a diva. It is chemically unstable. It is highly vulnerable to heat. It is vulnerable to light. If you take that spinach and you boil it for too long, or if you leave your vegetables sitting out in the sun, that folate structure just starts to break down. It degrades very quickly.
Okay, so folate is the natural, ready to work, but slightly high maintenance version of the vitamin.
Yes.
Which brings us to the other side of the coin. Folic acid. This is the one we see everywhere. It's on the back of cereal boxes, pasta packages, energy bars, cheap multivitamins.
Yes. Folic acid is the synthetic form. It does not exist in nature at all. You will never, ever walk through a forest and find a folic acid plant growing out of the dirt. It is entirely created in a laboratory. And chemically, it is the oxidized monoglutamate form.
Okay, so oxidized versus reduced.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental chemical difference between the two.
Right. And the reason it was created in the first place, the whole reason we have the synthetic version, is precisely because natural folate is so fragile and difficult to work with on a mass scale. Folic acid is built to be an absolute tank. It is highly stable. You can synthesize it, put it in a bag of flour, let that flour sit on a hot grocery store shelf for 6 months, bake it into a loaf of bread at 400 degrees, and that folic acid molecule is still perfectly intact.
So it's basically the preservatives of the vitamin world. It's built for logistics and shelf life, not necessarily for human biology.
It's built for mass distribution. And that really brings us to the historical context here because, scientists didn't just start synthesizing this stuff for fun. There was a huge, legitimate public health crisis that this was designed to solve. We have to give credit where it's due.
Right, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fortification success story. Because I think sometimes in the wellness world, there's this tendency to immediately demonize anything that has the word synthetic attached to it. But there was a real terrible problem that folic acid was solving.
A completely devastating problem. We are talking about the late 20th century here. Doctors and researchers finally connected the dots and realized that a severe lack of B9 in the diet was causing terrible birth defects, specifically neural tube defects.
And we'll get into the specific mechanics of that later, but just broadly, what was happening?
Broadly, babies were being born with severe spinal cord and brain development issues strictly because their mothers were deficient in B9 during the earliest stages of pregnancy.
And I'm guessing just putting up posters telling everyone, hey, please eat more spinach, wasn't really moving the needle.
It wasn't moving the needle at all. Public health campaigns that rely on eat your veggies rarely get 100% compliance. People are busy, food deserts exist, fresh greens are expensive. So in 1998, the United States government stepped in and made a mandate.
1998.
Yes. They legally required the fortification of enriched grain products with synthetic folic acid. If a company wanted to sell bread, cereal, pasta, or white rice, it had to have folic acid chemically added to it.
It was a way to passively treat the entire population. You didn't have to consciously change your daily habits or buy expensive greens. You just had to eat your morning toast and you got your dose.
Exactly. It was brilliant from a logistics standpoint. And if you look at the epidemiological data, it was a massive public health win. The rates of neural tube defects dropped significantly across the board. It is widely considered one of the great success stories of modern public health. It saved thousands and thousands of babies from serious, life-altering issues.
But, and there's almost always a but in these types of biological stories.
There is a big but, the trade-off. We solved one major problem, widespread severe deficiency in the general population. But in doing so, we introduced a completely new variable. We started flooding the human system with a synthetic oxidized molecule that our bodies had never, ever evolved to process in such incredibly high quantities.
Right.
We effectively changed the biochemical input of millions of people overnight.
And that leads us perfectly into what I like to call the biological obstacle course. Because looking at the research, the body does not treat these two things equally. It's not just a simple equation of in goes B9, out comes health.
Not at all. It is a highly complex assembly line. And this is where it gets really fascinating if you like biology. Let's look at the ultimate goal first. Your body doesn't actually use dietary folate, and it doesn't use synthetic folic acid directly. Neither of them is the finished, usable product.
They are just the raw materials.
Correct. They are raw materials. The body has to physically convert both of them into the active form before a single cell can use them. And the active form has a very long, very impressive biochemical name, 5-methyl-tetrahydrofolate.
Yeah, that is a mouthful. Let's just stick to 5-MTHF for the sake of all of us.
Deal. 5-MTHF. That molecule is the key that unlocks the door. That is what your cells actually consume for energy and DNA synthesis. Now, I want you to think of your liver as a factory.
Okay, liver's the factory.
A highly organized processing plant. When you eat natural folate, let's say, from that spinach salad, it enters the factory. Because it's already in a reduced form, it's like a VIP guest.
It's on the list.
It's on the list. The factory machinery recognizes it immediately. It flows through the assembly line relatively easily. The gut absorbs it. It travels through the portal vein to the liver. And the conversion to 5-MTHF is smooth and efficient. The body basically says, I know exactly who you are. Come right in. Let's get you to work.
Okay, so natural folate greases right through security. It has the fast pass.
Right. Now imagine folic acid shows up at the same factory. It is synthetic. It is oxidized. The factory security looks at it and says, whoa, hold on. We don't really recognize this structure. This needs a ton of processing before we can let you onto the floor. It is forced to enter a much, much more difficult metabolic pathway.
It's the slow line.
It's the very slow line. It requires a heavy, multi-step enzymatic process just to get reduced and ready for the final action.
Let's walk through those specific steps, because from everything I'm reading, this is exactly where the traffic jam happens.
It is. So first, this synthetic folic acid has to be converted into something called dihydrofolate. Then it has to be converted again into tetrahydrofolate. And this specific step requires a dedicated enzyme called DHFR dihydrofolate reductase.
DHFR. Okay, so DHFR is the worker on the assembly line responsible for this conversion.
Yes. But here is the massive catch. The DHFR enzyme is very easily overwhelmed. It is an incredibly slow worker. It has a very low functional capacity in humans. Research suggests that the human body can only process about 200 to 300 micrograms of synthetic folic acid at a time through this specific pathway.
Wait, pause right there. 200 micrograms. That seems incredibly low. I mean, I've looked at the labels. I've seen multivitamins at the local drugstore with 400, 800, sometimes even 1,000 micrograms of folic acid packed into a single pill.
Exactly. And that right there is the bottleneck. That is the core of the issue. If you take a cheap supplement with 800 micrograms of folic acid and your DHFR enzyme can only physically handle processing 200, what do you think happens to the other 600 micrograms?
I mean, it sits there. It's waiting in the lobby.
It backs up. The entire factory gets clogged. The enzyme's basically throwing its hands up saying, I can't do this fast enough. I'm at max capacity. And what happens is you end up with unmetabolized folic acid. The scientific acronym is UMFA, literally just floating around in your bloodstream, unprocessed.
So we are essentially sledding a very narrow hallway with way too many people, and everyone just gets stuck. The factory stops running smoothly, and now we've got people loitering outside the building.
That is a perfect analogy. And remember, this whole DHFR step, that's just to get the molecule to the middle stage. It's not even finished yet. There is still a final step required to get it to the active 5-MTHF, and that requires a completely different enzyme, the MTHFR enzyme.
Which brings us to the genetic twist of the story. I feel like MTHFR is one of those major buzzwords that people in the wellness space constantly throw around. And like I said earlier, it really looks like a swear word if you just glance at it quickly.
It really, really does look like an abbreviation for something rude. I hear that all the time. But it stands for methylene-tetrahydrofolate reductase.
A truly spectacular word for a Scrabble board if they let you use acronyms.
Oh, it would clear the board. But in all seriousness, it is the gene that provides the exact instructions for making that final enzyme. This enzyme is the one that puts the absolute finishing touch on the B9 molecule, finally turning it into the active 5-MTHF that your body can actually use.
That's the final quality control check. It's the worker that stamps the product ready for use and ships it out to the cells.
Exactly. But the problem is, this gene isn't a carbon copy in everyone. It doesn't look the same or act the same in every human body. And this is exactly where the concept of personalized medicine comes into play.
How prevalent is this variation, really? Because usually when we talk about genetic mutations or variants on a deep dive, we're talking about, 1% of the population having some rare quirk.
This is massive. This is absolutely not a rare condition. Roughly 40% of the worldwide population has a variant, or what we call a polymorphism, of this specific gene.
40%.
40%. That is almost half the people listening to this deep dive right now.
That is just huge. So what actually happens if you have the variant? Is your enzyme just entirely broken?
Not broken, no. Just sluggish.
Yeah.
Less efficient. And it depends on the specific variant you inherit. The two most common ones researchers look at are called C677T and POO58C.
Which honestly sound like droid names from Star Wars.
They do, R2-D2's cousins. Now, going back to high school biology, you get one copy of a gene from your mom and one copy from your dad. If you are what we call heterozygous, meaning you inherited one normal copy and one variant copy, your MTHFR enzyme works at about 65% efficiency.
Okay, 65%.
Right. You're a little slow, but you generally get the job done eventually.
And what if you're homozygous, meaning you got the variant from both of your parents?
Then your enzyme efficiency drops drastically. It plummets. It works at roughly 30% efficiency compared to a normal enzyme.
Wow, 30%. So your factory's final quality control line is running at 30% capacity. You're basically missing 70% of your biological production potential for this vital nutrient.
Correct. And here is the truly silent issue about all of this. Most people have absolutely no idea. You don't walk around feeling genetic pain in your liver.
Right.
You don't have a glowing red check engine light on your forehead. You just live your life. But functionally, biochemically, this means a person could be taking incredibly high doses of synthetic folic acid, thinking they're doing the exact right thing, trying their best to be healthy, but their body literally cannot convert it fast enough to use it.
So they basically have two massive problems happening at the exact same time. One, they aren't getting the active folate they desperately need, so they're functionally deficient at a cellular level. And two, they have all this unprocessed synthetic folic acid piling up in their blood.
Exactly. It is the tragic irony of expensive urine, or honestly, worse than that, expensive accumulation. You are spending your hard-earned money buying the supplement, you're swallowing it every morning, but it's just not doing the job you hired it to do. It's failing the interview.
Man, this brings us right into section 4 of our dive, the dark side of excess. We talked about the bottleneck, we talked about the backup. Let's really talk about UMFA, unmetabolized folic acid. Why does it actually matter if this stuff is just floating around in the blood? Is it actually toxic?
So researchers are becoming increasingly concerned about this accumulation. It's an active area of study. It's not just inert trash casually floating down a river. It's a biologically active synthetic molecule, and it might be interacting with things in ways we don't fully understand yet.
One of the biggest, scariest concerns you highlighted in the research notes is the masking effect. This relates specifically to vitamin B12. Can you explain that mechanism? How does one vitamin functionally hide a deficiency in another vitamin?
It's a bit tricky to wrap your head around, but stay with me. Vitamin B9 and vitamin B12 work very, very closely together in the body. They are essentially partners in blood creation. Now, one of the classic, highly visible signs of a severe B12 deficiency is a specific type of anemia where your red blood cells get huge, misshapen, and totally ineffective.
Okay, so usually if you lack B12, your red blood cells get weird, You go to the doctor, they run a CBC, and they spot the weird cells immediately.
Right. The alarm bell rings loud and clear. Now, if you are taking a massive amount of synthetic folic acid, it can actually step in and fix that specific anemia. It provides enough raw building material to force the red blood cells to look normal again under a microscope. So if you go to the doctor and get a standard blood test, they look at your red blood cells and say, hey, great news, no anemia. Your blood looks perfectly healthy.
So the folic acid has essentially turned off the fire alarm.
Exactly. It cut the wire to the alarm. But, and this is absolutely critical, the folic acid does not fix the underlying neurological damage that a B12 deficiency is causing at the exact same time. B12 is crucial for your nerves, specifically for maintaining the myelin sheath that protects your nerve endings. So the nerve damage just continues.
Wow.
It progresses silently, entirely unchecked, because the doctor thinks you are totally fine based on your blood work.
That is genuinely terrifying because neurological damage, once it gets to a certain point, that can be permanent, right?
It absolutely can be. By the time you start physically feeling the tingling in your fingers, or you start having weird balance issues or noticing cognitive decline, the damage to the nervous system might already be permanent. That is exactly why having high levels of synthetic folic acid masking a B12 deficiency is such a serious medical concern. It hides the only visible warning sign until it's far too late to reverse it.
Unbelievable. And what about the other concerns with UMFA? I saw some notes in the outline about cancer and immune function. That's always a really heavy loaded topic.
It is a heavy topic, and we really have to be very nuanced and careful here. We are definitely not sitting here saying folic acid causes cancer. That is alarmist, it's reductionist, and it is absolutely not supported by the full weight of the current scientific evidence.
Right. We want to be incredibly accurate and impartial here with the data.
Exactly. What we do know for a fact is that adequate natural folate profoundly protects your DNA. It stabilizes it and prevents harmful mutations. In that sense, adequate folate is highly anti-cancer.
Okay, so it's protective.
Yes. However, some newer studies have raised very complex questions about whether chronically high levels of synthetic unmetabolized folic acid, that UMFA floating in the blood, might accidentally feed existing precancerous cells. Because remember, B9 drives cell division. If you have a rogue cell and you dump synthetic growth factor on it,
It could theoretically accelerate the bad growth.
theoretically, yes. It's a highly controversial area of research, and there are conflicting viewpoints. But it firmly reinforces the biological principle that more is not always better. Balance is key. Biology generally prefers the natural form or the pre-activated form in moderate amounts, not a constant, overwhelming flood of synthetic material that it can't metabolize.
This raises a really important question for you, the listener. If the synthetic stuff has all these potential downsides and bottlenecks, and the natural stuff is incredibly fragile and hard to absorb consistently, why do we need B9 so badly? What are the actual stakes if we just ignore it? I know we mentioned pregnancy earlier, that's obviously the headliner, but let's broaden it and go deep on the why.
Well, pregnancy is definitely the headliner, and we really do have to start there because the biological stakes are literally life-altering.
Tell me more about the neural tube defects.
These are developmental conditions like spina bifida, where the baby's spine physically doesn't close properly around the spinal cord, and anencephaly, where major parts of the brain and skull just don't develop at all. These are devastating, often fatal conditions, and the science is overwhelmingly clear. Maternal B9 status is the primary preventative factor.
And the timing of when the mother needs that B9 is really tricky, isn't it?
It is incredibly cruel timing, honestly. The fetal neural tube fully closes in the very first 28 days of pregnancy. That is just 4 weeks post-conception.
Most women don't even know they're pregnant at 4 weeks.
Exactly. By the time you miss a period, decide to take a test, wait for the result, and finally schedule a doctor's appointment, that critical developmental window has often already completely closed.
That is terrifying. The window is shut before you even know the house is being built.
That is exactly why the clinical recommendation, universally across the board, is for women of childbearing age to start a supplementation protocol at least 1 full month before they even begin trying to conceive. You have to preemptively load the system so the folate is there on day 1.
Yeah, what is the actual dose we are looking at for that?
The general baseline recommendation for adults is 400 micrograms a day. But during pregnancy or when trying to conceive, it bumps up to 600 micrograms. But here is the major shift we are finally seeing in modern clinical practice.
The shift away from synthetic.
Yes. Because of the MTHFR genetic issue we just discussed, the fact that up to 40% of women might not efficiently process the synthetic folic acid, many informed clinicians are now specifically recommending L-methylfolate, the active form, or a high-quality prenatal vitamin that uses a combination.
It just makes sense. It's basically a biological insurance policy.
Yeah.
If you don't know your genetic status, and let's face it, most people aren't getting expensive genetic panels done, why risk the factory bottleneck? Just take the active form that definitively works for everyone.
Precisely. Bypassing the risk entirely is the smartest move. But Parker, I want to make sure the men listening or the women who aren't planning to have kids don't just tune out right here.
Right. Why should I, a guy who is definitively never going to be pregnant, care about my folate levels on a Tuesday?
Well, do you care about your heart?
I do. I'm quite attached to it.
Good. Because B9 is a major player in cardiovascular health. Its main job in the blood is to break down a specific amino acid called homocysteine.
Homocysteine. I've heard that word thrown around a lot in longevity circles. It's a key marker for systemic inflammation, right?
It's a massive marker for cardiovascular risk. I want you to think of homocysteine molecules like microscopic shards of glass floating in your bloodstream. Chronically high levels are strongly linked to a significantly higher risk of stroke and heart disease because those shards actively damage the delicate inner lining of your arteries.
And the body tries to patch that damage with cholesterol, right? Which leads to plaque.
You nailed it. That's the exact cascade. Now, adequate active folate steps in and physically converts that dangerous homocysteine into methionine, which is a completely harmless, actually highly beneficial amino acid that your body uses for other things. So folate is essentially the active cleanup crew for your arterial walls.
That is a incredibly powerful image. So it's literally taking the glass shards and turning them into something useful. And what about the brain? You mentioned mood and energy earlier in the intro. This is really interesting, too.
This is the brain connection. Yeah. And it's huge. Active folate is a mandatory cofactor in the synthesis of your major neurotransmitters. We are talking about the big three: serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine.
The happy focus chemicals.
The happy chemicals, the focus chemicals, the drive and motivation chemicals. If your brain is low in active folate, it physically struggles to manufacture enough of them. You simply can't bake the cake if you don't have the flour, no matter how good the recipe is.
So what are the actual symptoms of that? What does a brain lacking folate feel like to the person experiencing it?
It feels like chronic brain fog. It feels like persistently low mood, unexplained irritability, a really hard time concentrating on basic tasks.
It's interesting. You had a note in the research material that said, if you're feeling sluggish and blue, it might not just be a bad day at work. It might be your B vitamins.
It's incredibly true. We so often immediately look for psychological or external reasons for our mood changes, stress, a bad day at the office, relationship trauma, and those are completely valid. But sometimes the hardware just doesn't have the biochemical fuel it needs to run the software. If you aren't methylating properly because of an MTHFR variant or a bad diet, your neurotransmitters will drop, period.
And finally, let's touch on general cellular health. You mentioned anemia earlier.
Yes, specifically megaloblastic anemia. Like we said, without adequate B9, your red blood cells can't divide properly. They try to grow and split, but they literally get stuck in the growth phase. They become huge, oval-shaped, and completely useless at their one job, which is carrying oxygen to your tissues.
Which leads to
terrible pale skin, shortness of breath from minor exertion, and extreme crushing fatigue. The kind of deep fatigue where just walking up a single flight of stairs feels like you're trying to climb a mountain.
Okay, so the stakes are incredibly high across the board. We absolutely need this stuff. We know the synthetic stuff can be a tricky bottleneck. We know the natural stuff is great, but super fragile. Let's pivot to the practical guide for the listener. How do you actually apply this knowledge tomorrow morning? Let's start with food. You're very much a food-first kind of specialist, right?
Always. Whenever possible, food first. Biology inherently understands food best. The complex matrix of fibers and co-nutrients in whole food actively helps your body absorb the vitamins. You want to aim for what nutritionists call dietary folate equivalents, or DFE, strictly via whole foods.
So hit me with the practical shopping list. What specifically should I be putting in my cart to hit those DFE numbers?
Top of the list, always and forever, dark leafy greens. Spinach is the absolute king here.
So Popeye was actually completely right.
Popeye was definitely on to something, mathematically speaking. Though he probably canned his spinach, which is a major processing problem we'll get to in a second. But yes, fresh spinach, kale, Swiss chard, turnip greens. Next on the list is beef liver.
Ah, liver. The one food everyone knows is technically amazing for them, but almost nobody actually wants to eat.
It is nature's ultimate super multivitamin. It is incredibly densely packed with highly bioavailable nutrients, including natural folate. But look, I get it. If you absolutely can't stomach the taste or texture of liver, look heavily at legumes. Lentils, chickpeas, black beans. Avocado is also a fantastic, delicious source, and pasture-raised eggs are very good too.
Now, you dropped a hint a second ago about Popeye and the canning process.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the cooking caveat, because this seems like a place where a lot of people mess up.
This is absolutely crucial to understand. Remember what we said at the start. Natural folate is incredibly fragile. It hates heat and it hates water. So if you take that beautiful, expensive bunch of fresh organic spinach and you dump it into a boiling pot of water for 20 minutes,
You've just killed it.
you've completely leached the water-soluble folate out into the boiling water, and the intense heat has physically degraded whatever was left. You basically end up with a mildly nutritious pot of green water, which you pour down the drain, and a clump of wet fiber on your plate. If you actually want the B9, you need to steam your greens very, very gently for just a few minutes, or even better, just eat them raw in a big salad. You really have to treat natural folate with respect.
That's a really practical, actionable tip. Don't boil the life out of your expensive greens.
Hmm.
But here is the ultimate reality check. Can I, as a busy person, actually reliably get 400 micrograms a day just from eating salads and an avocado?
It is. It's very, very hard. I won't lie to you. It is theoretically possible on paper, but for the modern lifestyle and the modern diet, it is a daily struggle. You would need to consume huge volumes of raw greens every single day without fail. And with modern soil depletion, the nutrient density of our produce isn't always what the textbook says it is. That is exactly why high-quality supplementation is often necessary as a baseline.
So let's talk supplements. This is where the rubber finally meets the road. I am standing back in that pharmacy aisle again. I see the two identical bottles. What exact words am I looking for on the label to know I'm getting the good stuff?
You have to physically turn the bottle over. Do not look at the front marketing with the pretty pictures of leaves and sunshine. Look strictly at the black and white supplement facts panel. You want to completely avoid it if the B9 source just says folic acid, especially if you suspect you have MTHFR issues, or honestly, if you just want to be biologically safe and efficient.
So what are the magic words I want to see?
You are actively looking for the words L-methylfolate, or sometimes it's written as 5-MTHF. And in some really high-end brands, it will say 6S5-MTHF.
Okay, that last one just looks like a literal chemical cheat code.
It really does. But what that complicated code is telling your brain is, this is the pre-converted, fully active form of the vitamin. If you swallow this specific form, your body does not need the DHFR enzyme. It does not need the MTHFR enzyme. It completely bypasses the entire factory bottleneck we talked about, and it goes straight into your cells to do the work immediately.
That just seems like an absolute no-brainer. If this superior active form exists, why on earth isn't every single vitamin on the shelf just made with this?
Cost. Plain and simple, it comes down to economics. Synthetic folic acid is dirt cheap to manufacture in giant vats. It literally costs pennies per ton. L-methylfolate is a much more complex, delicate molecule to stabilize and produce at scale. It costs the manufacturer significantly more. But the good news is, as consumer awareness of MTHFR grows, the price of the active form is steadily coming down.
So who really needs to be the most strict about this? Who are the people who absolutely need to put down the cheap $5 bottle and pay the extra $10 for the active methylfolate?
I would distinctly categorize it into four main groups. Group 1, pregnant women or any woman actively planning a pregnancy. Do not take the genetic risk with the synthetic bottleneck. The stakes for the baby are just too high. Group 2, anyone with a known tested MTHFR variant. Group 3, people with chronic digestive issues, things like celiac disease, Crohn's, or severe IBS, because their baseline gut absorption is already highly compromised.
And the fourth group.
Group 4, heavy alcohol consumers.
Really? Why alcohol specifically?
Because alcohol is a direct, aggressive folate antagonist. It actively blocks your gut from absorbing it, and worse, it forces your kidneys to excrete whatever folate you do have much faster than normal. It is a biological double whammy. If you drink regularly, your B9 status is almost certainly compromised to some degree.
That is extremely good to know. And just before we completely wrap up the medical side of things, are there any major red flags, like symptoms where a listener should stop listening to this deep dive and immediately go schedule a doctor's appointment?
Yes, absolutely. If you are experiencing severe, crushing fatigue that does not get better no matter how much you sleep, if you are noticing a rapid, unexplained heartbeat or shortness of breath when doing basic tasks, those are classic loud signs of clinical anemia. Or if you have a known family history of recurrent miscarriage or severe cardiovascular issues at a surprisingly young age, those are all massive red flags that you might have a systemic methylation issue, and you need to get your blood levels professionally tested right away.
Okay, let's bring this all home. We've covered the history, the dense chemistry, the genetics, and the practical grocery shopping lists. Let's do a really quick, rapid-fire summary of the absolute key takeaways for the listener.
Sure, let's break it down. Number one, folate comes from nature. Think leaves. Folic acid comes from a lab. It's synthetic. Number two, your body has a built-in factory bottleneck. It can only physically process a very limited amount of the synthetic folic acid before it backs up into your blood.
Right. And number three.
Number three, a massive 40% of us have a genetic variant, that MTHFR gene, that makes that exact factory process even slower and drastically less efficient. And number four, the most actionable one. Always read the back of the label, look for methylfolate or 5-MTHF to completely bypass the genetic traffic jam.
Incredibly concise and clear. Now, I want to leave the listeners with a final provocative thought to mull over. You mentioned this concept very briefly earlier, the whole idea of fortified foods.
Yeah, it's something I really want people to chew on. We have been so deeply conditioned to think the word fortified automatically means better. You look at a box and think, oh, this cheap cereal is healthy now. It has 10 extra vitamins added to it. But in the specific case of B9, and honestly several other nutrients biology, vastly prefers the natural or pre-activated state. It really challenges us to stop and look critically at all of our supplements and fortified foods.
Are we actually getting healthier or just overloading the system?
Exactly. Are we taking things our bodies can genuinely efficiently use? Or are we just spending money to create expensive synthetic traffic jams in our own bloodstream? Just because a chemical is crammed into a multivitamin pill or baked into your sandwich bread does not mean your individual cells are actually capable of receiving it.
And that right there is the exact question I want you to ask yourself tonight. Go into your kitchen, open the cabinet, and actually check your daily multivitamin label. See exactly what form of B9 is hiding in there. You might be really surprised by what you find.
It seems like a tiny semantic detail, but biochemically, it makes a world of difference.
It really does. Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this crazy maze of sluggish enzymes and confusing pharmacy labels. This was incredibly eye-opening.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure.
And to you, the listener, if you enjoyed this deep dive into your own biology, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel and never miss an episode. We have plenty more biological mysteries to unpack together. Stay curious.